Think vegetable gardening stops when the freeze comes? Think again. I'll walk you through my vegetable garden and show you how I keep it alive and thriving through the winter months, the tasks that I do, and how it looks above and below the soil surface. Winter gardening comes with its challenges, icy mornings and stubborn frosts, but the rewards are well worth it. Imagine harvesting fresh spinach or pulling carrots straight from your garden soil when it's freezing cold outside. The garden looks pretty bare right now, but there's actually a lot going on. As the temperatures are dropping, so are the leaves, and as they come down, I'm shredding them and applying them right over the surface of the garden. Areas where they're bare, as well as areas where I've got things planted. By applying leaves this time of year does several things, but one of the biggest and most important things is it protects that soil, and it feeds those soil microbes as well. About a month ago, I laid down several inches of raw goat manure as well as some raw chicken manure right over the surface of my garden. And then over the top of that, I applied a couple of inches of leaves. And I want you to see what it looks like right now. When I start to pull back all of this organic matter, you can see that it's really nice and moist. And I haven't even watered. And as I start to pull it back even further, you can see that all of that organic matter that was raw is already starting to break down. That's because it has contact with the soil, so those soil microbes move in and break it down, as well as that water helps it break down. The soil is also extremely loose, and this is because of the activity of the worms. They're tunneling through, they're depositing their castings, they're breaking down all of this organic matter and bringing it down into the soil. This is going to make it really nice because you're going to have less prep come springtime. That soil is going to be fertile and rich because of that organic matter that you put in, the worm castings, and it's going to make it to where you don't have the need for fertilizers. So that makes the garden more self-sustaining. As the leaves continue to fall out of our trees, I'll run the lawnmower up to shred them. By shredding them, that helps hold them in their place a little bit better, and it also helps the water to penetrate. Now, one of the questions that I get quite often is all of that leaf matter, does that harbor insects, bad pests? And honestly, I've never had any problem when I layer 2 to 3 inches thick. The only time I've really had pests that overwinter is when I have large garden debris that's left over. And by shredding it, that definitely minimizes the problem. Leaves do blow around, but by shredding them, they tend to stay in place a little bit better. And after I apply them, I usually sprinkle them with water, and that helps make them a little bit heavier, and then they start to break down a little bit faster. And I can just rake them up and throw them back in the beds if I have to. One of the questions that I get quite often is, what seeds can you sow in December? And that'll all depend on your growing zone. In my zone 8, I can sow seeds of winter rye, claytonia, mache, mustard greens, and even fava beans. But that's if my temperatures, daytime temperatures, are in the upper 40s. But if your nighttime temperatures are quite low for extended periods of time, that can cause these seeds to germinate slowly and cause them not to thrive. So this is one of the reasons that I actually personally don't plant any seeds right out in the garden unless I'm doing it in a cold frame. A lot of these seeds can be planted in January, and they actually catch up to any seeds that were planted in December. Our days are starting to get shorter in December, but in January, our days are getting longer. So that helps those plants to photosynthesize and grow much quicker. So it just makes sense to me to just wait until January. That way those plants will have a higher success. And for zones that are 6 and below, it's absolutely necessary if you're going to be growing a garden in the wintertime to be using a cold frame or a high tunnel. When you're growing in small structures like these little cold frames, they can heat up quite quickly on a sunny day. So you want to make sure that you create some ventilation, some airflow. Even an inch or 2 is good enough. In this little section right here, I sowed a bunch of seeds, and then I placed a cold frame right over the top of some of them. And as you can see, the ones that are outside are still pretty itty bitty, but the ones that are inside, they're almost ready to eat. That's the big difference and the power of a cold frame. Leeks are one of my favorite vegetables to grow in the winter garden. They're extremely hardy and they can actually be grown down to zones as low as 3 with some extra protection of some straw or even grown in some cold frames. Winter varieties should be grown when you're growing leeks through the winter months, and one of my favorite is Tandora. It's extremely cold hardy and I don't ever have to use any type of winter frost protection in my zone 8. I leave my leeks in the ground all winter long, and when the ground is frozen, I have to wait for that ground to thaw during the day so that I can pull them up. If you live in a really cold zone where that ground never thaws, you'll need to grow them in a cold frame so that you can pull them up in one piece. A couple of my favorite ways to prepare leeks is to make a cheese tart, or just simply sauteing the leeks in some butter and then putting it over the top of garlic toast or soups or even omelets. That's just simple winter comfort food right from the garden. In October, on a full moon, I planted most of my garlic, and after it was up about 3 to 4 inches, then I applied a nice layer of shredded leaves. This will help keep that moisture in and keep the weeds out. One thing that I do through the winter months is make sure that I don't have the weeds, and I do the occasional weeding in my garlic beds. You don't want competition for your garlic, because if it shades out your garlic, then you'll end up with smaller bulbs. You won't see a lot of top growth on your garlic during the coldest parts of the months. What's going on underground is actually more important, that root development. You want a nice root system so that it can hold up those leaves when they start to grow. Bigger leaves, more leaves, developing early on creates bigger bulbs when it's harvest time. Once our days start to grow longer, the garlic leaves will start to grow, and at that time, usually the end of January, the first part of February, then that's when I'll feed it the last feeding of blood meal. This encourages that top growth. That top growth helps that garlic photosynthesize, which in return gives you a nice big bulb. This fall, we've only received 1/16 of an inch, at least after I planted my garlic, and that's not enough to sustain that garlic. So if we don't have any rainfall, then I like to water my garlic about once a week to keep that soil moist. If it's moist because it's really cold, you may not have to water. Our fall planted broccoli is now starting to head up. I have 2 different varieties. I've got heading broccoli and I've also got the sprouting broccoli. The nice thing about winter broccoli is you don't have to hurry and get it harvested before it starts to go to seed. With spring broccoli, and this will all depend on your climate and your temperatures, it has a tendency to go to seed pretty quickly. With winter broccoli, if you don't get it harvested when it's ready, it can actually sit there for an easy couple of weeks before it even starts to separate. Once I've harvested the main crowns of my broccoli plants, I leave the plant. This does a couple of things. That plant will protect that soil through the winter months, but it also sends up some side shoots for extra harvest. And I'll be able to continue to harvest it through the winter time into spring. We're expected temperatures to reach down around 20 degrees this week, and depending on how long it stays low, that can actually damage mature crowns. But a simple covering of frost blanket to protect these crowns will continue them to harvest through the winter months. Before we move on, we want to thank All Power Solar Generator for sponsoring this video. This generator is excellent for homesteaders or any household, offering backup power if the power were to go down. It can keep your freezer running and food safe. Used for recreation or even to run a heater in high tunnels or greenhouses on those cold nights without any electricity.
This solar generator has a 2016 watt-hour capacity and a 2500 watt pure sine wave inverter with a maximum of 4000 watt output. This generator will charge in 2 hours with a maximum 1000 watt solar input and will charge in an hour with a 2500 watt solar plus AC input. There are 5 ways to charge this generator. You can charge it with AC, solar and AC. You can charge it from your car or from a generator. It has a long life LiPo4 battery with 3500 charge cycles. It has a 4000 watt output with parallel connectors. This generator has a DC output that is a cigarette plug style. It has a 100 watt USB-C, an 18 watt USB-A, and a 12 watt USB-A, along with a 30 amp that is rated at 20 amps, and then 4 regular 20 amp plugs, so you can plug in just about anything needed. This generator ran a small freezer all day with the solar panels connected on a cloudy day, and it still has 96% left. This makes for a great emergency backup if the power goes down. With the Bluetooth app installed on your phone, you can check the remaining power. You may turn on and off power sources. You can check the input and output and the remaining battery life.
We use them to plug in lights and other items that need electricity when we do our nighttime or daytime classes on the farm. It's completely quiet, not disturbing your activities. This year we did something a little different for Thanksgiving. We went camping with our kids and used the generator to run the smokers to cook our Thanksgiving turkeys without the noise of a generator. We also used it to run lights around the camp for fun at night, and the 400-watt solar panels kept on charging the battery for continued use. The lightweight, flexible panels fold up easily for storage.
If you'd like more information about this solar generator, then check out the link in the description below. We've had a pretty mild winter so far, but now it's time to button everything up and protect it. Just this week, we put the poly back on the high tunnel. I love this high tunnel because I can put the poly on during the winter time to grow during the winter and get a jump start for spring planting, and then take it off for summer months and put a shade cloth over it to protect from the summer heat. We get pretty high winds here in southern Utah, so I want to make sure that I secure this high tunnel very well. The ends of the poly are longer than the frame itself. So what we've done is we take those ends and staple it to a 1x board, and then take that 1x and we fold it up. And then once that's folded up, then we actually screw that right into the timbers on the raised beds. This secures it from the outside and keeps it from moving around too much. We also take some cord to the tie downs that are almost to the top of the high tunnel, and that goes to the fence. This just creates more stability. On the inside of the high tunnel, we used more of that parachute cord from the top down to the bottom, just in the middle. This way I can still walk through it without being hung by the cord, and it also just creates it from rocking when those winds come up. Now this does take a lot of extra time to secure your high tunnel properly. But one thing about it is you don't have to worry about it in the middle of the night blowing away in a windstorm. With this type of securing that we've done for our high tunnel, this high tunnel has survived winds that reached 53 miles per hour. Now I think that's pretty good. Some of our cabbages are starting to head up in the garden, and we've actually eaten a couple of them already. And the flavor of those cabbages that are grown in winter are so sweet. Savoy cabbages are much hardier for cold temperatures than the smooth leaf cabbages like I have here. But I love the smooth leaf cabbages, so I plant them near the greenhouse. They get the radiation off of the heat and they're protected from the winds, so they do just fine right here. If you had a block wall and a south-facing garden area, you could plant cabbages there during the winter months. That block wall will radiate the heat and help protect that cabbage, and also help it to develop better and survive the winter. Cabbages are going to be pretty hardy right there, but if your temperatures start to drop to about 22 degrees, you'll want to cover it with a frost blanket to protect them, to keep them healthy through the winter. Brussels sprouts are the perfect vegetable to grow for your winter garden. They're extremely cold hardy, down to about 10 degrees, and I've never had to cover my Brussels sprouts, and they've been just fine. I usually harvest them around January to February time. This year I planted my Brussels sprouts about 6 weeks later, so we'll see what happens there. Freshly harvested Brussels sprouts from your winter garden taste completely different than anything you could ever find in the grocery store, whether it be fresh or frozen. And the biggest reason for this is that cold snap sweetens them. And when you harvest them, the day that you're going to eat them, they have all of those natural sugars that cause them to be sweet, and it caramelizes when you cook them. Absolutely wonderful. Kale and collard greens are great for the winter garden and super easy to grow. While I don't like to chew on them for dinner, I actually like to add them to quiches, soups, as well as omelets. And we all know that they're really good for us. Winter-grown brassica crops aren't near as pungent as they are when you grow them through the summer months. So most of the time when you add them to dishes, you don't even taste that off flavor. Kale also adds some color and some texture to your winter garden. I think they're quite pretty in the winter garden. But even if you don't eat them, they do a couple of things for your garden. They help stop soil erosion. And you can use the leaves to feed your chickens if you have chickens. Not only does this help up their production, but it cuts back on the feed bill during the winter. Spinach is a nice fresh treat from the winter garden. And if planted in the fall, you can have fresh spinach all winter long, especially if it's grown in a cold frame. Spinach is quite slow growing through the winter months when it's not in a cold frame. So if you want to have a lot of spinach to eat all winter, then you need to plant a lot. Spring planted spinach will recover from harvesting within about a week, but your winter spinach doesn't recover so fast. It takes about 3 weeks to a month, and of course depending on whether it's grown in a greenhouse and your temperatures, for it to recover for you to continue to harvest it. So you can see why you need to plant a lot of spinach if you want to eat a lot of spinach in the winter. Get out when the days are nice. They might be cold, but the brisk air can be refreshing. We all need sunshine in the winter months to keep our health up, and by getting vitamin D, it helps our energy levels. Breathing fresh air and getting exercise also helps us to cope with the winter blues. Winter gardening obviously is a lot less work than summer. You don't have near the weeding, watering is very minimal if any at all. You don't have to worry about preserving, and the frantic of harvesting isn't there. Winter gardening to me is a bit of a mindset. It's not a necessity like it was decades ago. If I wanted to, I could go to the grocery store and get fresh tomatoes as well as some fresh peaches. But I'd rather have food that I preserved from the summer garden and go out into that winter garden and dig up some root crops or harvest some fresh greens. To me, this is eating in season, and the scriptures tell us to eat in season. My canned goods are just produce that I bottled up in season. So I guess it's just a matter of opinion. Let me know what you think about that. We have it a lot easier to grow a winter garden than even 20 years ago. We have these weather apps that alert us when bad weather's coming. That way we know when we need to add some extra protection to our crops. And Frost Blanket, it's certainly more accessible. Much of the food that grows in the winter months has lost its appeal to our modern taste buds. A lot of people would turn their noses up to turnips and collard greens, but maybe that's just because the way it was prepared, or how long ago it was picked and traveled. And maybe they just heard somebody say that it doesn't taste good, it tastes nasty. Winter harvested foods just simply taste better. May God bless you and your winter garden.